Man, I'm not gonna lie, it's been tough trying to find topics regarding the Vancouver Canucks. Like, how many times can we go out there and make a video just talking about Elias Pettersson and the contract situation? We've already made enough conversation known about that. But aside from the PD contract, there isn't really anything else that we could do asides what ifs, other videos of hypotheticals in the past, looking over things like that, and I guess prospect videos that fall into that category too. Now, the problem with Vancouver is that their prospect pool as a whole, as we've talked about in prior videos, is one of the worst in the league. At least in terms of the capabilities, the guys at the very top. There are a lot of other teams that have much stronger prospects than the Vancouver guys, and that's not really Vancouver's fault. I mean, it kind of is because they trade away their draft picks pretty often, but either way, when it comes to the guys that are in the system, there are some names that are worth talking about. It's just the magnitude of how strong these guys could be. There is a lot to be desired with the Canucks prospect pool. But either way, even though that's the case, we still do have some guys who are worth talking about and who are worth making videos about and worth exploring as their NHL careers grow and prosper. Today, we are talking about one of them here, as we are going over to one of the undrafted guys in the Vancouver Canucks system, a 22-year-old from Surrey, BC, a guy who's got a pretty intense work ethic and who made strides with the Abbotsford Canucks this previous year. Let's talk today about Arshdeep Bains. Now, Bains, as a lot of Canucks fans are aware of, is from here. As we had talked about, he's from Surrey. He was a hometown guy, born in 2001, so he's just a year younger than I am, which is kind of awkward to think about considering he is a pro hockey player and I'm not. But Arshdeep Bains is a very intriguing player profile, 6 feet, 183 left-handed left-wing player, and he had spent the past few years developing and honing his craft in the WHL. He made his way over to the Red Deer Rebels in 2017-2018, and eventually became a pretty good player by the time 21-22 rolled around. You see, in this time frame, he was in the last year of WHL eligibility, and in this season's worth of play, he had 112 points in 68 games played. He was the top point producer in the entire WHL, had 43 goals, the most assists in the league, and he was also one of the top players in points per game, just bested out by Logan Stankoven of the Kamloops Blazers. Bains then signed a contract with his hometown Canucks, and the rest is history. He had played for the Abbotsford Canucks this previous year, and for a guy who is 21, 22 years old for most of the year, honestly had a pretty good rookie season, all things considered. 66 games played, 13 goals, 38 total points. He also was half a point a game in the Abbey playoffs. The thing with Arshdeep Bains is that he's got such an incredible work ethic that it's really difficult to try to pinpoint where the ceiling lies for this guy. In fact, in the Building Blue Prospects Report video the Canucks had in their own YouTube channel, you had Chris Higgins on the program talking about Bains and his eagerness to get better and to learn, to get new advice that he had never heard of before, and how he's got a really high ceiling. That's from the words of Chris Higgins himself. To help us out even further, we're going over onto an article by my buddy Chris Faber on Canucks Army, Canucks Prospect Review. Arshdeep Bains blew away expectations in his first pro year. Take a look at what Faber goes out there and writes about in regards to Bains. We saw a consistent rise in his effectiveness on the penalty kill. By the playoffs, Bains was looked at as one of the top 2 forwards who kills penalties for the Canucks, and he came up huge in the biggest moments, scoring big short-handed goals in the playoffs. There was one penalty kill shift where the guy had 2 short-handed goals. Yeah, 2 shorties on the same PK. Very, very nice. After such a strong season, Bains has put himself in the conversation to play NHL games next year. With Alvin and Rutherford's track record of letting prospects cook in the AHL, we likely won't see Bains get a long run in the NHL next year, but instead, he'll be looked at to continue growing his game and develop new skills in the AHL that will ultimately help him once he reaches the NHL. Now pause, before we continue here with Faber's piece, I really do like that point was brought up. We actually haven't made a video about this yet, but I do think it's a good conversation to have, that when it comes to the track record of what Alvin and Rutherford have done with prospects in the AHL, you gotta look back to 2016, 2017. Remember when the Penguins were winning those Stanley Cups and being dominant in the playoffs? Well, a lot of the guys that did well, of course you had the Crosbys, Malkins, Latangs, but Some of the biggest names that really made an impact on those Penguins teams were guys that, for the most part, were AHL guys. AHL guys that became bigger role players and more important players in those playoff runs. You had guys like Connor Sherry, Jake Gensel, Tom Kuhnackel, Brian Rust, all just being whatever players in earlier years who eventually spent enough time in the AHL to get a call-up and to have been given really good roles in these Stanley Cup winning teams. Connor Sherry is always going to be the guy that I thought of when I thought about the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. And then you had yourselves Jake Gensel, who broke onto the scene in the same way. Kuhnackel did the same thing. Dominic Simone was in that same sort of mold. And so when it comes to the AHL, I really like how Faber articulates that for these Abbey guys, you're probably going to see them stick around in Abbey for a while before they actually be given full-time NHL spots. And for Arshdeep Bains, the guy's only 22 years old. There is no rush for him to become an NHL talent right away. One note that has been hit on multiple times this year by AHL GM Ryan Johnson is that Bains needs a big offseason of working out. Johnson has told us that he wants to see Bains build muscle in his lower half. Skating is still the weakest part of Bains' game, but his pace certainly didn't hurt him in the AHL last year. Bains thinks the game so well that he is rarely out of position in the neutral or defensive zones. Then in the offensive zone, he has such a good offensive instinct, and his pinpoint passing skill shines at the AHL level. And when it comes to that off-season working out, hey, guess what? When it comes to Bains and what he's been doing, last we saw at Arshdeep Bains, he was actually practicing, skating, and training with a few interesting names at Burnaby 8 rinks. He's heating it up there with Vasily Podkolzin, Daniil Klimovich, Noah Juleson, Tristan Nielsen, and Connor Bedard. Yeah, that's a good name to be training with. Not gonna say that Arshdeep Bains has anything to do with Connor Bedard and his development, but there were some interesting comments that Bedard had to say regarding Arshdeep Bains. This is from about a year ago when Bedard was still in the WHL. This is from after Bains had signed with the Vancouver Canucks initially. Yeah, I'm a big Canucks fan, so playing against him, it was good to see them sign him. I mean, just how smart Bains is, him and King have probably been the most dynamic duo in the league this year, and just playing against them is so tough. I mean, just the way they're able to create plays, you know? Bains is one of the best passers in the league. Just watching his highlights and seeing how well he sees the ice is incredible. He's got almost 40 goals. The year he is having is insane. And yeah, I mean, I get it. Bedard is so much younger than Arshdeep Bains, and Bains had himself the luxury of playing against Connor Bedard before Bedard was having the incredible season that he just had. But still, getting that praise from that guy, not bad. And being able to practice with him in the offseason, of course, is going to help you just kind of adjust to top-tier talent, not to mention Vasily Podkolzin is there as well, right? So for Arshdeep Bains, this is one of the more intriguing prospects the Canucks have, a guy who needs to work on pace, but who is just so good at passing. He's got great offensive IQ, he works really hard, he's a penalty kill guy now, all while not being the biggest guy in the world, only 6 feet 183. He's only 22, so as an undrafted free agent, there definitely is more time for him to develop and become great. We just have to wait and see what the future holds for Arshdeep Bains and whether or not that sees any sort of Canucks cup of coffee in 23-24. What are your thoughts about the way Bains has developed so far? What are your thoughts on where he's going to go from here? If you had seen any Abbey games, what are your thoughts on how he had played in that situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.